Hello and greetings. I'm Dessa Goddard, Chairman of Asia Week New York. Welcome to the latest in our series of webinars featuring distinguished panelists in multiple fields of Asian art brought together to present, discuss, and provide perspectives on exciting selected topics in the rich and diverse fields that captivate us all. Asia Week New York is the collaboration of top-tier international galleries and major auction houses and numerous renowned museums and cultural institutions, originally founded to promote a week-long celebration every March filled with gallery open houses, Asian art auctions, as well as numerous museum exhibitions, lectures, and special events. We've now evolved into a year-round platform showcasing our members in webinars such as this one, as well as a newsletter and blog highlighting the activities of museums and lectures on important topics in the field. Today's webinar, Ahead of the Curve, Collecting Contemporary Asian Art, features internationally known experts and specialists in multiple fields, whose rich biographies can be found on the Asia Week New York website. Due to the multiple speakers, the presentation and following Q&A period will most probably extend over an hour, and we hope you will plan to stay with us. It's presented in partnership with Joan B Mirviss Limited. Since April of 2020, Joan has moderated 18 panels on a variety of Asian art topics. These may be found on her gallery's website. Joan B Mirviss has been a renowned expert in Japanese art, specializing in prints, paintings, screens, and most especially contemporary ceramics for more than 40 years. She is the leading Western dealer in the field of modern and contemporary Japanese ceramics, and her New York gallery, Joan B Mirviss Limited, exclusively represents the top Japanese clay artists. She is the co-founder of Asia Week New York and served as its first chairperson. I will now turn you over to Joan to introduce the webinar and our fine speakers. Joan, over to you.
Thank you, Dessa. It's a pleasure to be here. Welcome, everyone. It's an honor and actually a privilege to be your moderator this evening with such an illustrious panel of speakers and presenters. We have groundbreaking Asian art experts and enthusiastic collectors galore from whom you will hear. And from our Asia Week New York registration list, our programming seems to continue to attract viewers from around the world and from coast to coast in the United States, with over 20 states represented. Our audience tonight includes over 30 museum professionals, 20 academicians, a vast array of collectors, dealers, and auction house experts, members of the press, and even a nice number of graduate students, which is always gratifying. Tonight, with close to 500 screens booked, we'll see how many actually attend. You can see that contemporary Asian art already has a diverse following, especially in this country. So this panel is sort of my idea and how to present it. And for me, the purpose of this panel is to explore a constellation of reasons, both artistic and financial and even social, behind the recent explosion of Western interest in contemporary Asian art. Key factors that will be examined are the enthusiastic and generous support of very dedicated collectors, the pivotal role of Western art galleries, the support of American museums, and most critically, the simultaneous emergence of terrific art by senior masters, as well as the rising talents of younger artists. Tonight, our panel consists of 4 pairs representing 4 different avenues for up-and-coming collecting. It's admittedly an ambitious undertaking given the vicissitudes of the Zoom world, but we're keeping our fingers crossed that all our screens will stay audible and visible. I will offer questions to our gallerists and auction house expert who have each selected an especially passionate and articulate collecting client with whom to present. With this panel titled Ahead of the Curve, I hope to start an enticing conversation about the future of contemporary Asian art and its exciting avenues for collection building for especially creative, bold, and savvy collectors. Starting with Chinese ink painting, joining us from Seattle, we have Craig Yi from the Ink Studio and his collectors, John and Denise Knight from New York. In the area of South Asian art, we have Manjari Sihare Sutin from Sotheby's and collector Bharti Malkani. For Japanese bamboo art, we have Margo Thoma of Thai Gallery in New Mexico and the collecting couple Diane and Arthur Abbey of New York. And finally, for Asian photography, we have gallerist Miyako Yoshinaga and Havinga, chair of photography at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. So to begin, I want to actually preface everyone's comments with the world of contemporary clay, about which I happen to know something, and how this market is developed to perhaps give you an idea or even a strategy or game plan on how these other fields might evolve in the development of a market in the United States or in the West in general. First of all, maybe it's obvious to all of you, but it took me a while to figure out. In order to build a market, this requires a team. First and most importantly, a creative, masterful, diversified body of artists. Secondly, bold and far-sighted dealers to support and encourage those artists. Collectors, both private and institutional, to support them both with acquisitions. And then finally, museum curators and their staff to put the stamp of approval on the genre by hosting exhibitions and publications. In the case of contemporary Japanese clay art, and to me, it seems irresistible and obvious that a market would develop in America, but building an art market anywhere requires vision, passion, and taste on the part of all four constituencies. Since Japan opened its door to trade with the West in the mid-19th century, Western collectors and curators alike have had a love affair with Japanese clay. But it is in the last 2 decades that this love affair has significantly deepened and broadened. There has been an exponential rise in the level of American interest in Japanese ceramics, both functional and sculptural. These works have been embraced in America by passionate collectors, creative curators, and a curious, open-minded public. And indeed, this vibrant level of support has in turn, in fact, had a significant impact on the artistic development in Japan. So what you see in front of you is you have a home of truly my most acquisitive client, Jeffrey and Carol Horvitz, who somehow find a way to get their enormous collection of over 1,000 clay works of art in their home, and an exhibition that they sponsored and organized with the Cincinnati Museum of Art now over a decade ago, which actually brilliantly coordinated the works of the Barbizon School in France with contemporary clay art and brought new visitors to galleries that had previously been overlooked. Since 2000, there has been over 45 different exhibitions at American museums, many of which have traveled to multiple venues, bringing the total to nearly 80 exhibitions across this country. And not one of these museums was a ceramic museum. Even important encyclopedic museums have devoted prized locations and space focused on contemporary Japanese clay, attracting audiences of all ages. So here you see the balcony galleries at the Metropolitan Museum, and to the right you see a poster with the piece that you can see in the third bay from the left by Sakayama, which was acquired by the Met at a little after 2000, and was the featured piece for an exhibition on antique Japanese art as selected by the graphic design department at the Metropolitan Museum. So even 20 years ago, 2 decades ago, even the design department at the Met was focused on contemporary clay. For those in search of Japanese ceramics as collectors, curators, or simply visitors to Japan, either for business or pleasure, numerous exhibitions held in major cities at galleries or department stores have been attractive resources for collectors. Some have even ventured to make direct contact with the artists, But for the most part, it has been American dealers, both in the US and in Japan, who have brought this material to the attention of the American public. The vast majority of material now in American exhibitions and permanent collections has been acquired through the hands of strong and creative Western galleries, gallery shows, art fairs, via website offerings, and dealers' private connections in Japan. These dealers have resulted in being the arbiters of taste, choosing which artists and what works to promote, backing their choices, obviously with their own money. And here you see two recent exhibitions, one in Minneapolis and the other in San Antonio, using material from American collectors as well as museums and integrating it within their permanent galleries with the addition of what might be typically called fine art. Furthermore, American museums have worked with collectors and dealers to create special focused exhibitions and installations using both borrowed and acquired works that juxtapose works from other arts and cultures and periods. Thought-provoking and visually challenging, these exhibitions have appealed to a large and growing public. And here you see works by Kondo Takehiro called his reduction of body casts of himself done in porcelain with the metallic glaze, one in Minneapolis and the other in Seattle. And in the Seattle case, I don't have a picture to show you, it graces the entranceway to the museum. And in Minneapolis's case, it's been integrated with other antique works of Buddhist sculpture. And my final comment that I'd like to make is sometimes things come full circle. So having done this, pursued this field for multiple decades, at last I was asked by Japan to try and explain to the Japanese domestic marketplace just why the West thinks that contemporary Japanese clay is fine art and try and teach them what they don't understand about their own art form. And this was a book I published just before COVID hit and was printed by a division of Tsutaya, the #1 art publisher in Japan. And hopefully it will make the impact we intended. So I would like to turn our attention to our illustrious panel, having hopefully set the tone here. And my first question will be to Craig, who is the co-founding director of Ink Studio, a Beijing and New York-based gallery, an experimental art space devoted to researching, documenting, and exhibiting ink as a medium, language, and discourse for the creation of contemporary art. So Craig, my first question is to you. Many people in our audience may already know that ink painting has a long and very celebrated tradition in China and one that continues today. But from the context of this rich cultural heritage, how do contemporary ink artists stand out to you as a dealer, whether from each other or from the past? And how can we begin to understand that long, perhaps even daunting tradition and its vibrant contemporary practice from our Western perspective tonight? Craig?
Thank you, Joan, for that really interesting question and for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, Dessa and Asia Week for sponsoring this panel. As Joan mentioned, Ink Studio is a gallery based in New York and Beijing with 3 partners, myself, Sotheby's veteran B.C. Long, and independent scholar Britta Erickson. And today I'd like to talk about ink as a medium and as a language for the creation of contemporary art. Now we can think of ink as a medium. Carbon in the form of soot is often considered humanity's first artistic medium. Suspended in water, it becomes ink, and applied to absorbent paper or silk with a soft pliant brush, it becomes a complete art form. Ink, however, is more than a medium. It is, in addition, a language that is used in an unfolding discourse spanning at least 2,000 years, ever since the materials ink, paper, and brush were first perfected in the Han Dynasty. This language expresses a worldview, specifically the cultural, artistic, and philosophical world of what I will call pre-modern East Asia. Now, what may come as a surprise, however, is that this East Asian pre-modern worldview is, I would argue, profoundly compatible with and sympathetic to the predominantly Western postmodern world we live in today. In the West, we think of the, quote, postmodern as something new and of our time. However, in East Asia, the assumptions that underlie our postmodern world are as old as culture itself. We can think of contemporary art as consisting of many dialogues. There's a Western postmodern discourse that we call global contemporary art. And then there are many non-Western historical art discourses, of which East Asian ink art is just one. Now, as a gallery focused on contemporary ink, we look for artists making major advancements in the East Asian ink discourse, as well as artists who bring this historic discourse into a fruitful dialogue with global contemporary art. Now, artists don't always do both. They may do one or the other, okay? But we're particularly interested in artists that actually do both at the same time. So as an example of the former, we could spend the rest of our time talking about the extraordinary landscape artist and painter of scholars' rocks, Liu Dan. Or we could explore the figurative works of the quietly observant and hilariously insightful figure painter and self-portraitist Li Jin. Today, however, I would like to speak to you about Peng Kanglong, a painter of flowers, another one of the historically important subjects of ink painting. You can think of flower painting as the same as landscape painting. That is the painting of the cosmos or of nature, only on the scale of another living being like yourself. In this case, a flower, a plant, or a garden rock. Although related philosophically, landscape and flower painting are two distinct genres with their own metaphoric languages, painting techniques, representative masters, and developmental histories. Ink artists typically specialize in one genre, landscape, flower, or figure, and very rarely overlap. Peng Kanglong is a Taoist recluse artist living and working in Taiwan, who paints in both the landscape and the flower genres, oftentimes in the very same work. Peng's texture strokes for his flowers and his landscapes are based on calligraphy. These calligraphic texture strokes are a dense and refined, virtuosic performance, brimming with energy, but at the most minute and intimate scale. Surprisingly, what changes for Peng's rendering of flowers on your right, okay, so on your right is the flower section, to landscape, which is on your left in the same screen, is not this dense, energetic brushwork, but how he uses ink, tonality, color, and form to shift from the intimate and luminous sense of light and space that you get in a garden setting to the vast sweeping distances and grand resonant spaces that we experience in a landscape. Now, another artist, Wang Dongling, China's most famous living calligrapher, has pursued transformative advancements not in painting, but in the roughly 3,000-year-old practice of calligraphy. Not just as a traditional calligrapher, but as you can see here, as a performance artist. Traditionally, calligraphy was an art of elegant letter or essay writing, practiced by educated elites for an audience of educated elites. It was an art that extolled the artist, both capturing and expressing his or her character or personality, as well as his or her momentary state of inspiration. In this sense, you can view East Asian ink art as one of the most exclusive art forms ever conceived. It is literally art by the 1% for the 1%. In the spirit of our time, however, Wang Dongling takes this art form into the public square as a public performance, and in so doing, makes this formerly exclusive and elite art form universally accessible. And as a contemporary artist working on a global stage, Wang Dongling's performances are not just for Chinese audiences, but as well for international audiences. This particular performance took place at our very own Brooklyn Museum in 2015. And as it turns out, Wang Dongling's performances are not just for adult audiences, but for the very young as well. The power of performance is something we humans easily relate to. All cultures have performing arts, music, dance, theater. The earliest arts were in fact most likely performed rituals. Wang Dongling acknowledges this when he accompanies his calligraphy performances, as you see here, with dancers, and more recently in his latest project with opera director Peter Sellers, with vocalists. Performance captures the state of mind and spirit of the artist. We, the audience, experience this when we watch the artist perform. This we can only experience live. That is, in the same time and space as the performance, in the physical presence of the performer. When we say ink is not just a medium, but a language, in Wang Dongling's case, this language is more than visual art language. It is also performance language as well as textual language, because in the end, this is still writing. In the global contemporary art world, this trifecta of visuality, performativity, and textuality is absolutely unique to Wang Dongling. So with that, Joan, I just wanted to hand this back to you. And this is just a brief introduction to the kinds of artists we work with in our program.
Brief but compelling for sure, Craig. Thank you for bringing us on this guided tour. And boy, am I sorry I missed this performance at the Brooklyn Museum in my own backyard, and I missed it. It was fantastic. Thank you. My next question will go to Denise and John Knight, who collect contemporary ink art and Chinese ceramics. The Knights have spent truly half of their adult lives in Asia and the Middle East, and the remainder, thankful for us, here in New York, where they currently reside. So my question to them is, could you, Denise and John, tell us how you became collectors of contemporary ink painting? Did you begin by collecting a particular medium or of non-Asian artists? And how was your existing collection enriched by its expansion into Japanese contemporary ink painting? John and Denise?
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Actually, our beginning is with Chinese ceramics, and it goes back to 1998 with a wonderful dealer who helped us put together a collection of celadon that ranges from the early phases of celadon to northern song. This is just one of my favorite pieces. It's a Northern Dynasty vase. And then when we moved to New York, we started thinking about how to present this with contemporary art. And our bridge into Chinese ink art was Bryce Marden, whose work you see here. And Marden is a New York-born artist, but with a deep engagement in parts of his work with Chinese calligraphy, Chinese ceramics, both the colors and the shapes, Chinese rock gardens, and Chinese landscapes. And we thought this particular pairing would bring out something in both the ceramics and in Marden's own work. This particular work is from his Suzhou series. And we see it juxtaposed to that Northern Dynasty vase that we enjoy. But for us, Marden was a bridge to Wang Dongling. And as it happens, the two artists are friends and are in areas somewhat sympathetic in their own work. What we're seeing here is actually a poem. It's fallen petals have danced the dance of wind. And for me, as a non-specialist, it's sort of the outer limits of poetry and calligraphy, and approaching abstraction, but not quite there. And here you get a closer look at this, and he calls this his chaos script. And here we have it paired with Bryce Marden, and I thought it would be interesting to see Wang's work, which is sort of liberated by Western modernism, you could argue, and Marden's work, which is influenced by both calligraphy and the shapes he sees in ceramics and rock gardens. And Craig provided this photograph of the two artists at work, Wang at the left and Marden at the right. Their techniques are different, but their outcomes create an interesting conversation. And here you have the pairing of the chaos script, the Marden work we've seen, and the vase. Okay, here's the change. We're with Joan Mitchell, early Joan Mitchell in Paris. Not an artist, by the way, influenced in any important way by Asian art, but this is a sunflower. So we're talking about flower art, which takes us to our next slide. which is Hong Kong Loan, which Craig has talked to. And we just find Pong's works to be so cheerful and life enhancing that we very much enjoy them. And you see another example of his works in the next slide. Just three really life enhancing floral works. But in the next slide, you can see we actually enjoy pairing them with Joan Mitchell, who comes from a very different place. But when you put these two flowers together, you can see things in Mitchell that you may not have otherwise seen, and things in Pong that you may not have otherwise seen. But that takes us to another artist, the last one I'll talk about in our short time, Wang Tianda. And here we have both landscape as well as calligraphy, the calligraphy coming from Ming Dynasty rubbings. This is very much a winter scene, seasonal, lighting up the snow. Just as a viewer, when I look at this work, I think it's beautiful, but to me, I sense a certain stress in nature. And it's, I think, in part the stress of a cold winter day and what that does to a landscape. But at least to me, potentially, the environmental stress that civilization now imposes on nature. I may be projecting that into this work, but as Craig has pointed out to me, Wang's own work makes use of certain burnings of paper and cuttings, and it actually creates a sense of stress in the paper that at least to me creates a certain tension that I find interesting and unique. And this is the last image of that nice work. So in sum, we did not start off with Chinese painting, contemporary painting. It's where we're landed. We're happy we landed here. And I think we really enjoyed, Joan, pairing contemporary Chinese ink works with both much older Chinese ceramics, as well as the works of Western artists, some of whom were influenced by Asian art and others of whom were not.
Thank you, John and Denise. I actually am going to demand a visit to your home. I absolutely want to see these conversations that take place between the objects on your shelves and what's on the walls. Very intriguing. I love mixing things up and making those intellectual and visual conversations work. And I hope we have so many museum professionals who are watching tonight. Some of them will be inspired what you as collectors have been able to make those connections that actually would intrigue audiences in future exhibitions. So thank you for that. It's wonderful. We are going to leave the world of China and head over to South Asia. And my first question in that regard goes to Manjari Sihare Sutin, who heads the sales for modern and contemporary South Asian art at Sotheby's for America. He joined the house in 2015 and brings a breadth and depth of knowledge to her role, acquired over 18 years of experience in the field. So we're delighted to have Manjari with us tonight. And my question to her is, you are tonight's representative from the auction house. And given that auctions are by their very nature a secondary market, how do you curate your sales to promote the careers of South Asian artists? I'm actually very interested to hear this. Is there a different approach when it comes to living artists versus historical figures? And how do you mobilize deserved attention around the lesser known younger artists? Manjari?
Thank you so much, Joan. It's a pleasure to be here. The secondary market for modern and contemporary South Asian art is 26 years old. It was in 1995 that Sotheby's became the first international auction house to hold a dedicated sale in this category. So this category basically deals with art from the subcontinent, 20th century onwards, and from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Tibet. Our continued success in this category is in part due to a policy of introducing 5 to 10 new artists each year that have either never been at auction before or are new to Sotheby's. Auction houses are often, most auction sales in this category focus on a small group of well-established 30 to 40 artists. So we have worked over a period of time to expand that roster, not only to include new names, but to rethink accepted ideas of who have made contributions to South Asian art. So like we see in the first slide is are all women artists who we have featured in the recent. Amrita Shergill, who was the first Indian modern woman artist. Nasreen Mohammadi, who had a retrospective at the Met Breuer when it first opened up, and a modernist Indian sculptor, Pilu Puchkanwala. When you ask me how we mobilize attention towards lesser known artists, there are different ways. One is, of course, to present them within an art historical context, a movement, a style, a genre. When we get a major work of an artist who we think is important, we go out and try to seek works of other artists who were their contemporaries or part of the moment to explain to our audiences and our clients about what that artist's contribution within the larger context of Indian art and that movement was. We also consistently offer those artists over a period of time to familiarize and educate our clients. This is Mohan Samant. He was based in New York. He's a very important Indian modernist, along with the progressive group of artists. Over a period of time, we have dedicatedly featured him in all our sales, and that has helped to familiarize our clients. It started in 2010. We sold a work for $12,500. We offered it in 2013, in 2016. Next slide. And very recently in 2020, we created a world record for this artist of $162,000. His works are in the collection at the Met. Tate has recently opened a whole room which is dedicated to this artist. We also use a lot of marketing tools like catalog covers to highlight their works. As you saw in the first slide, we had Nasreen. Usually it's been the progressive group of artists. People know N.F. Hussain, they know F.N. Souza, they know Syed Haidar Raza, Vasudeo Gaitonde. But we've made this concentrated effort to have women artists featured, and we use these marketing tools. An important question that you asked me, Joan, in terms of approaches to living artists versus historical figures. Now that's very, very strategic, especially in the case of living artists. We have to be very careful. We are all professionals in the field. I've had 18 years in the business. I come from the museum world. I've always worked with artists. So in a public auction, when a work of a living artist does not sell, it can affect his or her primary market. So we have to act responsibly, not add works in an auction to bump up our number of lots or the sale value for our management, but actually think strategically to see if we actually have a buyer and then go for it. We also look at alternate approaches. We'll go to the last slide, is to look at not just the auction format, but things like the selling exhibition. And one of the things that we have done is to organize selling exhibitions of contemporary artists. So it's not an auction. It's not that timed format. We did this exhibition in 2020 of contemporary art from South Asia and Middle East around the theme of geometry. It had Anish Kapoor, Bangladeshi British artist, Rana Begum. It had Middle Eastern artists like Munir Shahrudi, Farman Farmanian, and Sehand Hessamian. And it was all around the theme of geometry, where people could just walk in like in a gallery and buy works off the wall. So that sort of mitigates the risk involved with featuring living artists in an auction or in a timed sale.
I understand that dilemma myself, and have often counseled artists themselves when they've been solicited by auctions outside in Europe to put works into their sale, that it's extremely dangerous. You have to know what you're doing, and you certainly don't want something to what we call buy-in, and you want for it to get a successful price in order not to undermine their market. And it's reassuring to hear that when I think of auction houses being secondary market, that they are considering the artist's future career, not just the present and the bottom line. Yes. So that's very reassuring.
It's important to be sort of part of that ecosystem that we are all part of. And, you know, sometimes we can't help it and works do come up at auction. In those cases, we give a heads up to their primary dealers and to them that this is coming up. So it's not like out of the blue.
Yes, exactly. And we as dealers are responsible to help those items to sell, to make sure that the market is stable and not whimsical.
Yeah.
Thank you, Manjari. That's great.
Absolutely.
So I would like to turn to your selected panelist, who's Bharti Malkani. And as we've heard from the Knights, how an existing collection can organically grow and expand into different fields. But could you tell us from your position how you got started in this very up and coming field as a newcomer to the art world? And what was your first acquisition, and how did you decide to start building a collection in South Asian modern contemporary art?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you, Bharti.
First off, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So in answer to your question, I never really was a collector of anything other than collecting stamps when I was a little girl. So I just sort of began my art collecting journey kind of by luck. I think so much of life is being at the right place at the right time. And it was in the late 90s. And back then, there was only a single gallery in New York that specialized in South Asian art. A good friend of mine was working at that gallery, lucky for me. She's an eminent collector herself. She told me about a show that the gallery was having of works by Francis Newton Sousa, and she insisted that I come. I received an invitation in the mail with this lovely landscape you see in front of you. At that time, I had never heard of Sousa and wasn't familiar with his work at all, but I loved the image on the postcard. Now, I'm not sure if you all are familiar with works by Sousa, but really there are many that are very startling with the grotesque heads and arrows sticking out of them. I knew I couldn't have any of those on my wall, so I bought the postcard instead. From there, I slowly started to attend more gallery shows and picked up paintings on occasion. On trips back to India, I would visit art galleries as well and picked up some works there. The market was still very nascent, but there were dedicated South Asian sales at the auction houses. Manjari just mentioned that the first sale was in 1995. It wasn't too far after that I started attending those sales, initially just to educate myself. I still remember coming home from some of those sales, by the way, wondering if buying the Sousa had been a bit a mistake because they couldn't give his paintings away. So many of them were going unsold at the auctions back then. But the very first painting, the very first sale in which I decided to actually bid was totally nerve-wracking. But I managed to pick up 3 works, including this gorgeous painting you see here. It's an Akbar Padam Se Metascape from 1978. And then a couple of other favorites from my collection are this M.F. Hussain horse and an early work by Prabhakar Barwe called Radiation of the Moon. So eventually, as an art collector, if you buy enough paintings, you run out of wall space. So then you have to consider other categories. So through a Sotheby's sale, I managed to pick up this gorgeous bronze by Pradosh Dasgupta. Now, again, I didn't know much about the artist at all until I saw the sculpture in the sale catalog and just loved it. So I really think that the work that's being done by Manjari and others to educate collectors and provide exposure to these lesser known artists is critical to strengthening and expanding the market for South Asian art. Not all of my purchases have been great ones, and there have definitely been missteps along the way, for sure, but that's all been part of the learning curve, and that's just how you hone your skills as a collector. I've been collecting now for almost 25 years, and I think just that if I, go with my instinct and buy the things that I love, there won't be too many regrets down the road. I devote a lot of time to monitoring all the auctions and attending gallery shows and exhibitions, and staying on top of all of that helps to keep me informed. I gravitated towards Indian art because it resonates with me culturally, and because I feel a connection to the stories of the art and the artists from the subcontinent. What I love about the South Asian art category is that it's small enough part of the art market where I feel I can really get in deep. I can learn a lot and make intelligent acquisitions. I find the larger art landscape to be kind of daunting, but collecting in this niche area is really manageable for me, and I just love it. So that's my story.
Thank you, Bharti. Clearly you have the bug. You are addicted. And I love the story of how you developed your eye, clearly over time. And having been a dealer for 40-something years, I have found that many collectors will hold on to those early acquisitions because that set the tone for where they went, even if in today's terms, they'd see those early acquisitions as perhaps fakes or mistakes or whatever. They're learning experiences, and those lessons learned are a part of the road that we all take. And you've convinced me some of this art is absolutely riveting and very seductive. So I look forward to seeing how your collection develops. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Now I'd like to go to the country that I all am passionate about, which is Japan. But instead of talking about clay, we're going to talk about bamboo art. And so for our first speaker is Margo Thoma, who in 2014 merged her American contemporary art gallery, 8 Modern, with Thai Gallery, the celebrated gallery promoting Japanese bamboo art, resulting in Thai Modern, which is based in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Thai Modern continues to advocate for Japanese bamboo art worldwide and has placed works in some of this country's most prestigious institutions. So Margo, my question to you, if I can now find it, is do you feel that Japanese bamboo art is underappreciated and undervalued? Has that perception changed in the last couple of years during the pandemic compared with previous levels of interest? Who have you seen more recently coming to you as new collectors of bamboo art? Because as a clay dealer, it's been very hard to find new collectors in our virtual world. So I'm very curious to hear what you have to say. Margo?
All right. I guess the short answer is yes, for the most part. I do feel like Japanese bamboo art is undervalued. It's not inexpensive. I know that sometimes people will walk into the gallery and be completely shocked that we could ask $20,000 for a basket. But bamboo art is still an art form where, as an artist, you can be among the best in the world at what you do and still barely be making a living. So by that metric, I think it is definitely way undervalued. Despite that, I'm not sure I would say it is underappreciated, at least not in the US. People who know about this art form often have a great deal of appreciation for it, but I would say it is underknown. A sizable majority of the people who walk through our doors for the first time are unfamiliar with this, with the work and the artists we show. If they recognize Japanese bamboo art, it's usually because sometime over the last 15 years, they've seen one of 3 museum shows, either the Abbey show at the Met, the New Bamboo show at Japan Society in 2008, or Modern Twist, which was a traveling show drawn from the Clark collection. As to your second question, it's hard to say whether levels of interest have increased or decreased, because the last 2 years have been really weird. It's hard to find a baseline to compare to. Sales were down, particularly in 2019, but not as badly as I expected, considering that so many of the ways in which we bring our art to people were gone. Asia Week was canceled, art fairs were gone. Sometimes we weren't even open to the public. And it, not only a matter of being able to show work to people, for about half the year, it was very difficult to get new work from our artists because the Japan Post stopped shipping internationally. However, I do believe that certain channels of reaching people have opened up or expanded. And I don't think we can take credit for that ourselves. I think partly maybe people's level of comfort with digital communication was forced to increase. But for our part, we started creating virtual exhibitions for the first time. And these were mainly group shows drawn from inventory. And we were very pleasantly surprised to find that our clients were willing to buy works from a digital catalog or an online exhibition. Other dealers have told me that they've sold works via Instagram or Facebook. We keep trying, but that hasn't happened for us. So if anyone knows the secret, please tell me. The number of email responses we get when we send out an e-blast has also increased. As you mentioned before, a lot of the interest we get is from pre-existing collectors. But I think there's been a slight uptick in the number of people who are willing to reach out in response to a digital communique. On a non-digital note, I have noticed over the past 8 months that we are seeing more people coming into the gallery completely unaware of Japanese bamboo art, who are willing to make a substantial purchase right off the bat, a serious piece. In the past, generally, collectors have kind of worked their way up. But only time will tell if these new buyers become collectors.
Thank you, Margo. My experience is very similar to yours, although you're in Santa Fe and I'm in New York. But we've had definitely an uptick in gallery visitors who come and say, oh, this is their first gallery experience they've had in 2 years. And they felt safe coming there. I'm sure they feel the same way about your beautiful gallery in Santa Fe. And in my case, they're all experienced collectors. It's great that you're finding a new audience for your gorgeous art. And that's exciting. And hopefully when you come back to New York in March for Asia Week 2022, which we are hoping and praying with all crossed fingers and toes comes to pass, that you will again find new audience here in New York. Thank you, Margo. I would like to now turn to our friends, Diane and Arthur Abbey, who have been acquiring Japanese bamboo baskets, or I would say bamboo art, for over 25 years. Their outstanding collection has been promised as a gift to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and includes works ranging from relatively unknown artists to living national treasures. And I've had the privilege of seeing their collection installed not only at the Met, but also in Tokyo, where it looked fantastic. And I'm going to just add to this. The Abbeys are not just merely supporters of the field by their collection, but also supporters of the field by endowing a chaired position at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And that is critical to the maintaining of the field of Japanese decorative arts. So may I say, once again, thank you for that. And my question to the Abbeys, of which I have so many questions, but we've designated one question for you guys. Tell us about your experiences of seeing your collection installed in museums in Japan. I only saw one venue. Hopefully you were there for all of them. And the encounters that you had in witnessing and the installation and the exhibition and the course of planning and actually visiting these venues throughout Japan. I don't know, speaking Diane or Arthur or both of you, I'm anxious to hear what you have to say.
Well, it will be both of us at some point in time, but I'd like to say this to just start. Thank you, first of all, for inviting us for this wonderful panel. And being able to express how much we love our collection and bamboo art and everything that's happened to us in regards to being able to show it all over the world, really and truly. About 25 years ago on a business trip to Santa Fe, we went to a local gallery, Thai gallery at the time. And we went there because we were going to see textiles, actually. And in the process there, we saw Japanese bamboo baskets. And truthfully, it was very much love at first sight. And at that time, we really loved them, and we developed a wonderful relationship with the gallery owner. At that time was Rob Coughlin and Mary Hunt Kallenberg, and we went on trips. We started to go on trips to buy baskets, and with other people, of which we formed a small little group, and we started and we put together and managed to put together a fabulous, a wonderful collection of museum quality pieces. At another point in time, many years later, John Carpenter became the curator, the head curator of Japanese art, and he came over to our apartment because he had heard about our collection, and he looked around and he turned around and he said, we have to have an exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And Arthur and I were astounded at this suggestion, really and truly. And it really and truly, for us, opened up a wonderful, extraordinary part of our lives. Working with the Met was extraordinary, putting together, having Monica Vincent put together this extraordinary and wonderful exhibition. And it was exhibited in the Japanese wing from 2017 to 2018 for about 8 months. Roberta Smith said in the New York Times Review, bamboo's presence in Japanese art is lavishly paid tribute by the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Japanese Bamboo Art, the Abbey Collection. The Met exhibition was gorgeously curated by Monica Vincent. And so Monica exhibited, as many of the other collectors talked about and gallery people, she exhibited the bamboo art with many other pieces from the museum, and that was extraordinary. And so this also brought together, the Met was really startling and brought together many, many of the Japanese artists of different venues. And this is also what was very exciting. This one exhibit that we see here is the entrance of the exhibit of our exhibition that was done by Tanabe Chukunsai, the fourth, who came and did this wonderful entrance. I'll let Arthur continue to talk about how our wonderful exhibit then traveled to different places. This is the Met exhibition. This was the big poster that was in the foyer of the lobby when you first came in. And these are, the first panel is people looking at the older pieces, and the second panel is one viewing of more modern pieces.
So Joan, you asked about how it feels to have your pieces at the Met. Well, we live across the street from the Met, and the show was on for 8.5 months, and there were over 400,000 people from all over the world who came. The show was on when the UN opened in that year in September, and the Prime Minister's wife brought a delegation over from the UN to look at our collection. And to have a full page review in the New York Times with your name and pictures and so on, and to be able to walk across the street almost every day and to walk into the gallery and sit there and watch the people going ooh and ah about your stuff and so on. It's sort of an out-of-body experience. It is so unusual and so special. that we still get goosebumps when we talk about it. And to make matters even better, it was decided that the show was good enough to go to Japan and to be exhibited in leading museums there. And that was very, very exciting. And what Monica did that was so special was not only did she show the bamboo, of course, but she mixed and matched the bamboo with pieces from all the other museums. That would be the first place was in Owita at the Owita Prefectural Museum. And they had contemporary paintings done by younger artists. And she decided that that would be the backdrop for that exhibition, those paintings. And then from there, it went to Tokyo, to the Tokyo National Museum, Contemporary Museum. And I mean, we went to the museum across the street from the palace, as you know, and there things were put with pieces from that were in the collection of the National Museum. That was glass, ceramic, metal, textiles, and it was just a great show and a big poster when you walk in that said the Abbey collection. I mean, we felt like we had really hit the jackpot, and it was just so unexpected. We collected the bamboo from our heart. We were not trying to put a collection together and then say, well, let's see if we can get a museum to show it or something. It transpired over many years, and we had many trips to Japan, and we kept buying things, and at one point we had over 300 pieces. The one thing I would like to correct you about is the pieces are no longer a promise gift to the museum. The pieces have been gifted to the museum, and when they return from Japan, they return to the museum where they are hopefully perpetually going to be part of the collection. And some of them have been shown in other Japanese collections. We went from Owita to Tokyo, and then we went to the Ceramic Museum in Osaka. That was the third venue.
The collection went to the
Yeah,
Osaka.
when I said we, our collection went there, of course. And unfortunately, in the third month of the exhibition, we ran into the situation with COVID, and the museum closed. And it took a number of months. We had to put the collection in storage because it was too difficult to move it with what was going on in the world. And eventually, it came back to New York, and it's now at the museum. And Diane will tell you, it was a great situation for Japanese artists. The idea that you were going to be, your piece was going, living artist, and there were many in our collection. It's not antiquities, it's contemporary bamboo. And so they came to New York. For many of them, it was their first trip. And they brought the members of their family, and they would stand in the lobby of the museum, and there was a big sign, that what was going on at the museum at that time, including the bamboo show, and they would take pictures, and it was a really exciting moment for a lot of people. So, Diane, you can.
I would just like to say, I think, aside from the joy and the experience of working with the Met and with Monica and John Carpenter and the whole Mike Hearn and the whole Asia department, all of the Met, really and truly, everybody has been an extraordinary experience. And at this point in time, we feel like family to each other. And I think the most heartwarming and exciting part of it all was that here we had collected these pieces just from our heart. It really was from our heart and what we loved. And then all these people who had produced the art, who had made the art, came here and was able to see it. Even now I talk about it and I get goosebumps. extraordinary and still is in our hearts and minds, really and truly.
You know, for an artist to show pieces in a museum is one thing, and there are many museums, but for a Japanese artist who've been working with bamboo all their life to come to New York and see pieces on display at the Met, well, it brought tears and joy, and it was just a very emotional experience. So all we can say is that it's changed our lives, and it turned out to be just from every standpoint, from the people involved to the museum and all that went with it. And even to this day, we bump into people. We were in Budapest, and somebody came over to us and said, "I saw your show at the Met," and I mean, my God, it's terrific. So I think we said it all.
Well, you guys, I understand completely where you're coming from, because there's, for me as a dealer, I've always considered myself a virtual marriage broker of putting the artwork in the best home with the best artist, and making that symbiotic relationship work. And what better home could there be than the Metropolitan Museum of Art? And I've seen clay artists brought to tears to see his or her work so beautifully displayed at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So I understand completely. And I'm hopeful that many of our viewers tonight and our participants and our dealers will take this gorgeous story to heart and facilitate similar narratives for their respective fields. Thank you. That was wonderful. So now I am turning to a Pan-Asian topic, to Miyako Yoshinaga, who I know forever. Yes, right, Miyako? I was at her wonderful, beautiful wedding, and a few decades ago. And Miyako has transcended her earlier roots. I met her through Amy Poster at the Brooklyn Museum many decades ago. She founded her gallery in 1999 in New York, which is now called Miyako Yoshinaga Gallery, and it's flourished as the premier showcase promoting international artists in the field of photography, with a focus on innovation and cross-boundary processes. So Miyako, my question to you, since your field of interest, Asian photography, spans so many countries and so many decades, how do you pick your artists for exhibition and representation? And since Asian photography is relatively a new and growing field for institutional collecting, how do you work with curators and museums in order to establish an artist's position in the marketplace?
Sure. First, thank you for your questions and for inviting me to this fascinating panel discussion. So when I promote my artist, I research and conceptualize a museum quality exhibition. As a dealer, I've been featuring Asian photographers, and by grouping them, I strive to raise awareness of the field. However, I am not just interested in packaging and labeling their work as Asian photography, and rather, I want to position their work in the context of global contemporary art. I'd like to start with my current exhibition of Hai Zhan, a US citizen born in China in 1976. He went back to his homeland frequently between 2013 and 2017 to document its drastic changes. For example, a crowd looking into a Zaha Hadid building in Beijing and the riverfront under the smoggy sky of Wuhan. But as he travels expanded to small towns, his focus shifted to people and landscapes left behind by the changes such as these images. In the end, Zhang selected 1,700 images from his trips to create his personal archive, and making this accessible to our visitors, we began to receive special interest and supports from various experts and public alike. The Frying Frying Pan series by Japanese artist Hitoshi Fugo features extreme close-up of a frying pan surface under natural light, which are nothing like to each other. His attempts to liberate himself from a particular place, time, and object remind us of Zen practice. Our 2015 exhibition of the series was covered by the New York Times, and my client purchased several works for 4 different museums in the US, with a condition that the recipient also purchase an additional piece. So this gave us an important opportunity to achieve the series being represented by each of 4 museum collections as a group of 4. In 2014, a friend of mine invited me to meet Korean master photographer Jun Myung-dak at his studio in Korea. And after my visit, I immediately felt compelled to do a show with his work from the 1960s to the 1990s. Originally from North Korea, Yang Ju caused a sensation with his photograph of mixed-race orphans outcast by society, such as this image. He also documented urban transformation and the traditional architecture in Korea under the threat of demolition. And one of his emblematic landscapes of Korean mountains, such as this work, was acquired by the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art after their curators saw our exhibition. I hope other institutions will recognize this 81-year-old artist as one of the most important Korean photographers working today. Gender is also a hot topic in Asian photography. Miki Kohara, now in her mid-50s, only recently received the prestigious Japanese Photography Award. We mounted 2 critical exhibitions of her work in 2017 and 2019. Her street snapshots often focus on women, and Hara is a keen observer of a society in which women are still repressed. And still life is also her favorite subject, and this work was acquired by the National Center for Visual Arts in France through Paris Photo, the world's largest photography fair. My last artist is the Pratt-educated young Japanese photographer, Yojiro Imasaka, who uses analog techniques and approach akin to early photography. And inspired by nature as a rich repository of spirituality, he captures virgin forest in black and white and often tones his large print through a chemical process, such as the image on the right. And since 2017, I've been exhibiting his work at the Paris Photo. And this year, I met the publisher who proposed a monograph of Imasaka for global distribution. And if this is realized, it will be a career-changing opportunity for this young artist. So I'm very excited about this. So over to Joan. Thank you, and I hope my presentation answered your questions.
Oh, it answered my questions and opened other doors to further questions.
Oh, okay.
But I have to say, I've always been a fan of Imasaka, as you know, and acquired a piece for my own collection, which I was really excited when I was at the Minneapolis Institute of Art to see that they had acquired an impression of that same photography. Right. So I felt very vindicated, and obviously I'm a fan of Miyako's gallery.
Thank you.
So I want to turn our attention to our one curator speaking this evening, who's Anne Havinga, who is the Estrelita and Yusuf Karsh Chair of Photography at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. Since joining the museum in 1989, she has led the photography section since 2001 and is now the newly formed department's first chair. So we're very excited to have you with us, Anne. It's great, and we need a different perspective from you. So my question for you is, through your background, is obviously in the full history and range of photography. The narrow range, if you will, of Asian photography is still rather new, as we've just heard from Miyako, for collectors and for institutions. How did the MFA Boston begin to build their collection in this area? And what are some of the characteristics of how this collection has been formed? Can you highlight some of the key moments in the shaping of the Asian photography collection at the museum? And what are some of the areas that you would like to see the museum pursue and acquire in the future, going into the future? So Anne, please.
Thank you very much. And I'm so pleased to be with you all tonight and grateful to be invited. I hope you can see my picture now because I don't see myself. I am a general photography curator who works with the entire history of the medium. In my department, I work with two wonderful curatorial colleagues. And while we are all interested in the entire history of our medium, we have also divided up our field. And one of the areas that I cover is Asian photography. A main way that I have built up our Asian photography collections, it has been through strategic partnerships with other curators in my museum. The beauty of an encyclopedic institution like the MFA is that the curators can collaborate closely on projects and learn from our varying perspectives. One of the first exciting exhibitions that I was involved with was with Anne Nishimura Morse, our William and Helen Pounds Senior Curator of Japanese Art, and our then Curator of Contemporary Art, who was Cheryl Brutfin. We organized in the mid-2000s a show of the photographs of Sugimoto Hiroshi from the collection of Sylvan Barnett and William Berto, professors of English literature and collectors of Japanese art. This exhibition and the long, close friendship that Anne Nishimura Morse in particular had with these collectors led to a major gift of their holdings, including 17 photographs by Sugimoto, which came in 2015. Thanks to Sylvan Barnett and William Berto, we have several photographs from Sugimoto's theater and seascape series, as you see here. And as I am sure you all know, in his long exposure photographs, he combines traditional Japanese themes of time and repose with Western ideas of minimalism and conceptual art. Next slide, please. One of the next projects that I worked on was one undertaken again with Anne Nishimura Morse on the photographic response to 3/11, the earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear disaster that took place in Japan on March 11th, 2011. The title of our exhibition was In the Wake, and it was held at our institution in 2015. We found that a number of photographers felt compelled to record not only the physical effects of this event, but also to interpret the overarching significance of the tragedy through their art. Here you can see works by, on the left, Shiga Lieko, whose hauntingly expressive images, very large photographs, this one in particular, underscore what was lost in this earthquake and tsunami were not only the physical structures, but also the web of societal relationships of a particular place. Hatakeyama Naoya, whose work is at the top right, whose hometown of Rikuzen Takata was devastated and who lost his mother and his ancestral home in the tsunami, documented the ravaged landscape as well as the cleanup and the slow reconstruction, including, seen here, the removal of a small mountain so that its soil could be used to raise the level of the land by the shore. And Arai Takashi, whose small daguerreotype you see at the lower right, was made at precisely the time of the earthquake. It is an image of his hand holding a petri dish containing radioactive ash from the 1954 Bikini Atoll nuclear tests. His hand was shaking from the vibration of the quake, and so the image appears blurred. It is a photograph that was intended to be about the memory of one event, but became a memorial to two events. Next slide, please. In 2018, working with one of my photo curator colleagues, Kristen Gresh, we were able to acquire the private collection of Howard Greenberg, the New York City photography dealer, thanks to a major gift from the Philip Leonian and Edith Rosenbaum Leonian Charitable Trust. Included in the 447 works in this acquisition were a small number of extraordinary Japanese photographs, including this wonderful image by Ueda Shoji at the left, whose work combines surrealist elements with realistic depiction, and on the right, a powerfully large print of one of Hosoi Eiko's most celebrated portrayals of Yukio Mishima, the legendary, brilliant, and controversial Japanese writer, an image that was used for Hokoi's strikingly original photo book, Barake. Next slide, please. Through the years, we have also been making individual acquisitions, of course. Some time ago, we purchased this photograph on the right of Moriyama Daido's close-up of woman's tights, which shows his radical approach to the medium and his emphasis on the grittiness of modern life. And on the left, we acquired this image by Tomatsu Shomei of two American sailors last spring, an image that underscores the American presence in post-war Japan, as well as conveying the sailors' alienation. Next slide, please. We also have acquired this Ishiuchi Miyako from her apartment series from the 1970s. The MFA Boston has an endowment to bring contemporary Japanese art lecturers to the museum, and Ishiuchi was one of those speakers. With its world-class collection of Japanese art and its prominent collection of photography, the MFA is in a unique position to tell the story of Japanese photography. And so we have made more progress in collecting the photography of this country than in that of other countries of Asia. Next slide, please. Turning to what photographs that we have acquired by artists working in other nations in Asia, we have this photograph by Fan Ho, the Shanghai-born photographer who moved to Hong Kong at an early age and is known for his poetic images of that city from the 1950s and 60s. The oblique camera perspective in this image bears the influence of Bauhaus photographers such as Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, for example. We also have several photographs by the contemporary Korean photographer Bon Chung-koo, of which I can't show you any images, unfortunately, because they have not yet been digitized. Next slide, please. We also have work by the British, Mexican, American artists Si Chung Nicholas Leong, who is of Malaysian background and who explores the social forces, historical aspects, and political pressures that shape cities around the world. His very large scale, Old Fengdu #1 Chongqing municipality explores the complexity of progress in the city of Old Fengdu, which was demolished and flooded for the building of the Three Gorges Dam, the largest dam in the world. This photograph was steered to us by the artist as a gift a few years ago. And my last slide, please. And I would so love to acquire additional work by this photographer, one perhaps like this one, which was not taken in Asia. It was taken in Rome. A few years ago, Se-chung Nicholas Leong was a resident at the American Academy in Rome, and he was still there when the pandemic broke out. He made a series of photographs of the empty streets of the city. Here, the Pantheon, with just a couple of people and a few vehicles on the street. In recent decades, this location has been flooded with tourists, and here it is made quiet. Se-chung Nicholas Leong's contemplative images make one think about the passage of time and change on the appearance of a city. One of the great pleasures of working at the MFA is the tremendous collegiality among the staff. And I'm hoping to build strength in our photography collection, not only through working with Anne Nishimura-Morks in Japanese art, but also with Christina Yuyu and Nancy Berliner in Chinese art, and with Laura Weinstein, who works with our South Asian art collection and Islamic material. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Anne. And in fact, I was one of the lucky ones to see the exhibition of the tsunami organized by yourself and the other Anne. and was very moved by that installation. I hope many of our audience was so lucky to see that, and that I think is a great bellwether for future collaborations, as you've indicated, with other Asian departments within that amazing institution, the MFA Boston. Thank you, Anne. It's been an amazing journey tonight. I think we've heard a lot. I think we all maybe are going to alter our focus ourselves from our narrow visions of Asian art to perhaps jump ship and investigate other areas. We have a little bit of time, or we don't, but we will anyway, to answer a few questions that have come in. And my first question actually is for Bharti. Someone was asking that in your discussion, you mentioned you had made some missteps. And this audience member, and repeated by someone else, wants to know what constitutes a misstep, and how would you warn us from making the same mistake?
Yeah, so actually I saw that come in, and I'm glad I had a little bit of time to think about it. Basically, I realized that during my collecting journey, that as I've been building out my collection, there have been oftentimes I've been wanting to buy a particular artist that's not in my collection. And, because it's not like I have one artist and I have multiple works of that artist. I generally buy one piece by various artists to build my collection. And what I found is that sometimes I am impatient. And so I will end up settling for a mediocre work by an artist that I'm looking to add to my collection, rather than playing the long game and being patient and waiting for that quality. And so those are, some of the missteps that I would urge people to try to avoid, just to exercise some restraint and some patience. It's hard as collectors, we get excited, but as I've sort of learned, there will always be another opportunity. So that's my answer to that question.
It's often the axiom, the fish that got away versus the fish that got caught. And sometimes so many of my clients have said their biggest regret is about something that got away. It's rarely something they bought, that they wish they had been stronger, or bid one more time, or been in the right place at the right time. So thank you for that. That's great. Maybe for the Abbeys, since your collection, which is no longer your collection, is now the Met's and Monica's collection, and you have so many, shall we say, children, do you have a particular favorite that, or one piece that you wish you still had in your beautiful apartment on Fifth Avenue?
Honestly, I honestly think that I could say that I have not one regret in terms of anything, any piece of bamboo art or any piece of art that we've bought. I love every single piece of them. I don't have real favorites. I just think they're all beautiful, and I love the idea that we live with them. The ones that we have, I was happy to give the Met so other people could enjoy them as much as we do. And I really can say that I don't have a particular favorite. Arthur?
There are two pieces on the screen now, the bowler hat, and that was done when Japan was opening up to the West, and bowler hat was a Western thing, and so it was Shokensai did that bowler hat. That's a really whimsical kind of thing. The one in the left corner is one of the great pieces in our collection. It's one piece of bamboo. All of that is just one piece. And it was, it won, I think this is right, the first prize ever in the Niton competitions, as competitions in fine art in Japan, the first prize by a bamboo piece and a bamboo artist. And it's very, very historical. It is a great piece. So the answer is it's like asking somebody who's your favorite child. They're all the same, and we love them all. What happened?
Thank you, Arthur and Diane. They are all our children, and I feel the same way as I broker my way through all these multiple marriages. But it's great that such an historically important piece is now in the right home, where it will be appreciated, published, and researched, and hopefully loaned out for future exhibitions and be accessible to scholars. So that's wonderful. Maybe I would like to turn to our dealer contingent here. After all, Asia Week is an association of dealers and auction houses. To ask my colleagues, how do you recommend a collector get started? How do you recommend a client start a relationship with the dealer who is going to guide them through this process of building a collection? So maybe I'll start with Craig, if he has some thoughts on that.
Great question. You know, one of the things, I come from a background of actually studying classical art. And so, you know, part of the attraction of working in contemporary art for me was, you know, I was spending an enormous amount of time trying to get people into the mindset of a 17th century Chinese literatus. And it was great fun, but it was an incredible challenge. And what I found fascinating about contemporary artists is they were oftentimes coming from the exact same world. In a sense, they knew the history, they knew the art, they knew the aesthetics, they knew all of that. And yet they were moderns or they were contemporaries themselves. And so they were doing the translation for a global audience already. And yet their artwork was very much in dialogue with the same world that I was experiencing looking at classical art. So my encouragement actually is, if possible, to sit down and actually meet an artist. It's one of the great privileges of collecting contemporary artists. You get to meet, you can meet. These artists are living in our time today. So is there an opportunity to actually meet an artist or to establish some kind of dialogue with an artist? Even if that means maybe just collecting locally at first. So is there an artist in your city, in your area, where you have a chance to actually meet and dialogue with that artist? And what I find is that actually being able to get into the psychology of creativity that an artist is engaged in, and having that, you know, close at hand through a personal engagement, then allows a collector to gain deep insight into artworks and to the processes of other artists, whether they've met them or not. That insight of knowing a creator and the work that they created then ends up being an incredibly important intellectual and experiential scaffolding for understanding the practices of other artists.
I understand that. And I have brought collectors to Japan. Sometimes the artists I have found to be very erudite and articulate as to their oeuvre, and others who can't put a sentence together to explain what their motivation is, and they just expect the audience to get it. So I have found sometimes that works, and sometimes it's up to the audience themselves to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Let's hope. And then, of course, there's the language issues that make these things all very complicated. Perhaps, Margo, would you like to add something along that line from your experience with bamboo artists?
Certainly. I think, you know, it's important to remember there's not just one type of collector. I mean, people collect in countless different ways and are motivated by different things. And I guess I think it's good for a collector to understand what they get out of collecting. But general advice that probably applies to everyone: see as much art as you can, just to train your eye.
I agree with that completely. And in fact, before you make your purchase, just look, go around and look and try and gain as much access, either from institutional collections or auction houses. So I'd like to ask Manjari, from her perspective as an auction house expert and an auctioneer, how would you, from an auction house perspective, encourage people to start collecting?
I would go back to what we what you spoke about, just look at a lot of art and see to get a sense of what you like, what you don't like. I also encourage them to go across the board to galleries, to online portals to get a sense, specifically in auction when we have a work of one particular artist. I also share a lot of comparables with them for them to get a sense of the market. I send them books. I send them scholarly articles for them to get a sense of where this artist stands, especially if it's not a living artist. So I think the key is to just look, inform, look with your eyes, keep your ears open. That is the primary aspect of things, of just getting started and getting an understanding of what you like and what you don't like, and how it fits within your own collection, or how it doesn't, everybody doesn't buy to build a collection, how it resonates with you as a person.
It's absolutely true. And the other question, as an institutional buyer versus who has a agenda and an educational perspective of what fits within a collection,
Yes.
versus a collector who's going to live with it. How
Yeah.
happy are you going to be and have this in your home and look at it every day? Is
Yeah.
this something that gives you joy and pleasure? Is this something that stimulates you intellectually? Something that gives you some emotional response, be it painful or otherwise? And is that something you want to be part of your daily life? It's really important.
Yeah.
Thank
Always
you.
buy what you love.
Absolutely.
I mean, as an auction house expert who deals with secondary art, when people tell me, make us buy something that is going to be 3 times the value, my first response is always, if you don't appreciate it, it's not going to appreciate. So you want to be willing to live with it.
I like that. I'm going to quote you on that. That's perfect. Miyako, do you have anything to add to this discussion before I ask one more question to close tonight off?
But yes, I was thinking like maybe this is a little bit photography specific way to think about how to promote contemporary Asian photography, because photography is often 2-dimensional and it's a print. And sometimes people start collecting just the books. There is a very, very big market of photography books, and it was amazingly expensive photography, rare photography books, such as Anne mentioned, Eiko Hosoe's very famous Ordeal by Rose. This is a fantastic big photo books. It's really like objects itself. So in a way that the photography books are a good way to invite people to look at the field. And also it's a very easy, accessible way to look at the contemporary photography artists. Also encouraging people going to the museum shows, other gallery shows. I think there's a many ways that people can self-educate about contemporary Asian photography if you start looking for the opportunities.
Thank you, Miyako. Absolutely. I'm going to make the last question be for the Knights. Amongst all of us here, you are collecting in a multiplicity of fields, being ancient China and different media. And you mentioned that you worked with a dealer who helped build your ancient Chinese ceramic collection. I'm asking how you have determined who were going to be your artistic advisors and gallerists or art historians who were going to guide you in your collection process, and how did you make that determination of whose judgment you felt was the right taste, aesthetic, and historical perspective for your collecting?
Okay, I'll take a crack at that, and if she should come in. I think the first thing in difficult areas, you want someone who's patient, and Craig and Musin have been patient with us. Susan Chen was patient. They recognized we were on a journey, but at the same time, they really loved what they did, and it did come from their heart. And I think that combination of helping us on our journey and sharing a passion is what worked for me. Denise, do you have anything you wanted to add?
Yes, to add to that point, I think also, I'm thinking also of comments made by the Abbeys and Bharti and Margo and others. You look at everything as much as you can. You go to all the armory shows, the auction houses, the galleries, you educate yourself. And at the end of the day, and then as a result, you talk to people, you talk to dealers, and you establish a relationship. And it's that connection with others and with the dealers and other professionals in the field. We've become friends with so many lovely people who are passionate about what they do, are very good at what they do, and who have kind of taken us in and are, as John said, are very patient and make that extra effort to educate us. And now with whatever we collect, our dealer friends will stay in touch with us, and if they find something they think we would like, they let us know. And we've loved that connection with others of people who are so interesting as well as so passionate about the art they carry.
Well, I think that's a beautiful way to end this discussion, that we're all a family of art lovers who care passionately about Asian art, and that we all love sharing our art with other people, be they friends, family, academicians, or the public in general with institutions. So thank you, one and all of you amazing speakers and great proponents for our field. Thank you very much for being here. It's been a lot of fun, and this recording, of course, will be available on the Asia Week website in a few days if you want to see it again. I am going to now turn the floor over to the chair of Asia Week, Dessa Goddard. Dessa?
Thank you. Thank you, Joan. On behalf of Asia Week New York, I want to thank all the panelists for their wonderful and inspiring presentations. And also, most importantly, to all of you participants for joining us and for your support of the Asia Week community at large and Asian collecting as a whole. Please visit our website to learn more about our exhibitions and events at our member galleries, auction houses, and museums. And if you haven't already, please sign up for our newsletter for updates on our next webinar and event. On behalf of all of us on the Asia Week Planning Committee, we look forward to seeing you soon and often. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.